Welcome to Monerica. This is your host, Riot. This is the voices of the Monero economy.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. Sorry for that. There was a problem with the previous one, so I just started another one. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can hear you fine. These Twitter spaces are so buggy and unstable. It works about 70% of the time. So it's a little jumpy, but yeah, we could hear you fine and glad you're doing this.
Okay, great. So today we're bringing on Finney Forum, and that's a Bitcoin, Monero, privacy, and cyber security focused conference. And the conference takes place between March 15th and 16th, and you can buy a ticket with Monero at finneyforum.com. That's FINNEY forum.com. And for our listeners, can you please introduce yourself? It says you're muted.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, hello everyone. This is actually Ragnar speaking for Finney Forum. I'm one of the co-organizers of Finney Forum, along with my partner Diego May. So myself, I'm a longtime Bitcoiner and been into Monero for, I guess, 3 years now, maybe a little more. Originally coming from Bitcoin, and really excited to put on Finney Forum and really excited to have Monerica as a partner. My experience with Monero is as a business owner, accepting Monero as a method of payment for conferences mostly, but also for gear, for Guns and Bitcoin. Guns and Bitcoin, we put on 3 conferences, accepted Monero there. And then we sell hats and t-shirts and things like that, all accepting Monero. So not a pro, but definitely a practical user of Monero.
And so, what makes Finney Forum different than other cryptocurrency conferences?
Great question. So it depends on if you're comparing it between Bitcoin or Monero. So I would say Finney Forum is more aligned with a couple of the Monero conferences that are out there and probably more kind of the privacy centric um, type of conferences. What makes this unique is that we also include Bitcoin and then Monero, and then this year with Finney Forum, including cybersecurity topics. So to me, you have to put Monero in the context of the larger picture. And so I don't think people can fully understand Monero without understanding everything else. So that's why we include Bitcoin, why we include cybersecurity and privacy. Now, if we compare Finney Forum to Bitcoin conferences specifically, well, I would say most Bitcoin conferences are quite terrible. At least the maxi conferences, they tend to focus on like philosophy and on kind of anything besides practical usage of Bitcoin. A lot of the conferences are focused on like influencers and podcasters and special diets and completely misses the point of Bitcoin and crypto in general. Bitcoin conferences tend to be hostile towards anything but Bitcoin, which is kind of contradictory because Bitcoin works well together with other tools like Monero. And so the short answer to the question is what makes Finney Forum different compared to other crypto conferences is I would say that it's a focus on privacy, all the tools for sovereign individuals. And we practice what we preach, which is accept Monero and Bitcoin.
Great, and we'll ask some more. I'm going to ask some more conference-related questions before we go into circular economy stuff. So, Finney Forum is named after Hal, or I guess more accurately, Harold Finney. Why specifically did you want to use his name for this conference?
For us, Hal Finney is the, I think, earliest and really ultimate example of what a cypherpunk is and what you can do. And he exemplifies all the things I think we should aspire to, and he did it for decades of his life. And specifically, I think most people will know that Finney came up with reusable proof of work, which is obviously Satoshi used. I think everyone knows that Finney was the first person, Hal Finney was the first person to receive a Bitcoin transaction from Satoshi. I will mention 2 other things about his tweets. So the first thing he ever tweeted about Bitcoin, which was running Bitcoin. That was his first tweet, was running Bitcoin. And I believe his second tweet after that was looking into ways to improve the privacy of Bitcoin. So if I were to summarize what how Finney has to do with Bitcoin in this conference is that he focused on two things, actually using Bitcoin, running Bitcoin, and number two, finding ways to improve its privacy. So those are kind of the key aspects of Hal Finney, of who he was, what he contributed, and even to a certain extent how he treated other people. He wasn't a grouch; he was kind to other people. And another aspect about Hal Finney that's interesting is his dedication. I think a lot of people know that he had ALS and unfortunately died of ALS. And it got so bad that they lose control of muscles. And to the very end, Hal Finney was actually working on Bitcoin. He used, I believe, sort of a breathing tube techniques and kind of an interface, computer interface, where he could still code things. So this great man was still contributing to Bitcoin, even though he was in a wheelchair and functionally paralyzed. So there's so much that can be said about Hal Finney, his dedication, his contributions, who he was as a person. And then finally, I think this is my last point with Hal Finney. If you're a Bitcoiner, a lot of people hate and love ordinals and NFTs. And it was Hal Finney who kind of had an original idea for NFTs, which is his cryptographic trading cards. So if Hal Finney thinks cryptographic trading cards are a good tool, a good idea, a fun thing, I think it's hard for us mere mortals to kind of disagree with him without being kind of hypocritical about some of our beliefs. So we're just really honored to put our conference in the context of Hal Finney.
And so, speaking more specifically about the talks and the sessions, is there any specific one you're looking forward to the most?
Ooh, that's a tough question because I think we really have the perfect mix and variety of speakers. Our keynote speaker is Tor Eklund. So I think by default, I'd have to say, hearing Tor Eklund, for those who don't know, he's the lead attorney on a case where they accused someone of being the founder of Bitcoin Fog. And Bitcoin Fog was a Bitcoin mixer from the early days. And the case is, from what I've seen, very weak. And so basically the federal government, their case against him is very weak. And if he loses the case, it could be very bad for him. So we're really glad to have Tor Eklund come and be the keynote speaker. Now, the case is coming before the court. I think it's the first week in March, and so by the time our conference starts March 15th, the case might already be over. We might already know what happened. There's a small chance it'll go all the way to the conference time, but by the day of the conference, we'll know what happened in the case. So I would say Tor Eklund, and then I think I look forward to every other speaker. We didn't choose one speaker where I'm like, I don't know if I really want to attend that one. So a lot of them I'm looking forward to.
And why do you think an in-person conference is important? Obviously, we can do these Twitter Spaces and everything, but why in person?
I think there's several reasons. So I've put on many conferences, attended many conferences, and in my experience, nothing can substitute for real world interaction, meet space interaction. And that's for a few reasons. Number one is you simply can't feel like truly part of a community without speaking to people face to face. That's just the reality. We're humans, we're meant to interact with people in meet space. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a certain amount of, I would say, kind of ideas that are created when you actually speak to someone face to face. I think there's a feeling of sort of connection with other people using Monero. It just becomes much more real when you can be in person with people and feel like, yes, I'm not a crazy person behind a keyboard all day. There's other people who really see the value in this. And another reason why an in-person conference is important, I think, is to sort of forge bonds with other users and to kind of reinvigorate yourself. These conferences are really hard to put on, and it's mostly a thankless job, and not not a lot of money in a privacy type of conference without a lot of speakers. Um, and so by going to an in-person event, it really accelerates, I think, enthusiasm, reinvigorates people. After every conference, I say two things. I never want to do this again because it's so hard. And I also say I look forward to the next conference because I always leave just really excited.
And I thank you for inviting me. I will be there myself. And so you had Guns and Bitcoin before, is that correct?
Yeah, so Guns and Bitcoin was the company, and then we put on three conferences that were called Bear Arms in Bitcoin. Kind of confusing to people. But yes, those conferences were focused on Bitcoin, Monero, and privacy in general. They also had a gun component, but we're not doing that anymore.
And what do you say to people who are interested in topics at the conference, but due to their own personal privacy, they're hesitant to go?
That's a good question. So obviously, if you care about your privacy, an in real world meat space event presents some challenges, obviously. And so what we do at Finney Forum, we do our best to protect people's privacy. Primarily, the first thing we do is allow people to pay in Monero or Bitcoin. You lose a lot of privacy when you pay with a credit card, if you're really being paranoid about it. We see every order that comes in, obviously. And so if you use a credit card, unfortunately, we do see your address. That's just part of it. So just accepting Monero and Bitcoin itself gets very far. Another way we protect privacy is if you pay with Bitcoin or Monero, you don't have to provide your real name, anything like that. So you could stick with the pseudonym. Basically, you just have to provide an email address where you can, get your ticket and things like that. So we don't check, names at the door. There's not like an ID verification thing. You just present your code, which will be emailed to you, and scan the QR code. We also have order numbers. So that's the other thing is when you go to check in, we don't have a way to know your real identity if you use Bitcoin or Monero. Of course, I suppose you could use virtual cards. That's not quite the same. Another thing that we do is we discourage photography. So we ask that people don't take pictures of other people unless they get their explicit permission. Obviously, speakers are different because they're up on stage, so you can take a picture with them. But we just try to ask people not to do it otherwise, and most people in this community respect that. I mean, that's why they're going to the conference. And then, of course, people are free to wear face masks or anything else that they like.
And what do you hope people leave Finney Forum with or do as a result of going to the conference?
We hope that people will, first of all, make friends or connections with other people who are there. It's a big bonus to do that. We hope people will go home from the conference and have more knowledge and skill and motivation to actually use the tools, to actually use Monero or Bitcoin as a method of payment, to learn ways to improve their privacy, be more interested in the topic. So it's really our goals with the conference are really practical. We really want people to leave better experienced and better motivated than they came. It's not just a purely social thing. We try to have specific speakers that provide specific concrete tools and information and resources. And so that's kind of the primary goal we have with people.
And so the conference is about both Bitcoin and Monero. I guess we can start to get into more specifically, how do you see these two currencies working together?
So we see Bitcoin as, it is the most liquid, prevalent cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is the most accepted currency in terms of, method of payment when you visit different vendors and companies and organizations. And it's much easier to acquire Bitcoin than it is Monero. And so that's a big thing is that if you use Monero, it also really helps if you use Bitcoin, because it becomes easier to move in and out of Bitcoin with swaps and decentralized exchanges and such. And not everyone accepts Monero, but a lot of companies do accept Bitcoin. So I see them working together. Um, like in that sense, like liquidity is when I think of people ask me, well, why Bitcoin? I mean, it's kind of like transparent. It doesn't have the privacy, has higher fees, all these sorts of things. Well, I think it's a good liquidity provider, especially if you start out just having more Bitcoin. Um, the other way is that they do things that the other ones can't. Obviously, Bitcoin, for better or worse, you can do NFTs, inscriptions, and so that's its own circular economy. And so that's how they kind of go back and forth together. I think Bitcoin can feed into the liquidity of Monero, and Monero can often give you kind of the privacy that you're seeking. I can't imagine using only Monero and getting by in the world. It's too limiting.
And on that note, there's this whole kind of expression floating around, which I'm curious what you think of, which is sort of save your money in Bitcoin, but spend it in Monero. What do you think of that? Sorry, I think you're
Oh, sorry.
muted.
Good question. So I could see that argument of why you would want Bitcoin to be more of a investment and Monero more of a as a tool, because the facts don't lie. The fiat price of Bitcoin has gone up more so than Monero. Bitcoin has had a higher ROI than Monero in terms of just a purely investment perspective. So that is another good reason to kind of realistically grow, how much value you have in crypto is Bitcoin is good for that. Another good reason to use Bitcoin as sort of investment is that it's easier to get. It's easier to buy, and if you're sort of forced to use a centralized exchange, and you just are like, hey, I don't care, I'll use a centralized exchange because I just don't need to go through the hassle and the work of doing a decentralized exchange, then you can do that. So I think that is a good argument, and I think it's a realistic argument.
And what would you say to someone who's just not even in crypto at all? Like, why, they've worked their whole life for dollars and, whatever certainty they think that brings them. Why would they participate in a Bitcoin and or Monero circular economy or want to do that rather?
I think I think it's actually a very small number of people, a fraction number of people who really will understand the need for it. Um, and I think for them, they need to really understand what's going on in the world, especially in the United States and in the kind of the Western world. We're just being put under so much accelerating surveillance, um, so much gatekeeping, so much censorship that even a couple of years ago we never would have thought would happen. I mean, look at like the Canadian truckers, what happened to them. And so, why should people care who normally didn't? Well, because be realistic about what's coming down and what we're seeing. And some people just don't care. They don't think it affects them. And I think maybe that's true. Maybe that is true. But I would say if you don't quite see it yet, at least be prepared to use it. You may not think it's necessary, just use PayPal or credit cards. And maybe that's fine for a lot of people. But I think if anyone has even the slightest thought that maybe it will become necessary, they should start now, because by the time you need it, it might be too late.
Right. I've tried to say it's just kind of like knowing where the fire exit is. It's not that there's an imminent, threat necessarily, but at least you know what you can do. And so, what do you think is missing the most in a Monero circular economy?
Well, in a Monero circular economy, I think what's missing is just more companies and individuals accepting Monero. Uh, that's the main thing. But I'm hoping that the delisting of Monero will actually accelerate that rather than decelerate it, because earning Monero is a lot of fun. It's a lot more fun to earn Monero than it is to buy it. So I would just say what's missing is just that. And I love Monerica. I love what you're doing with it because you simply go to the website, you could scroll down and look for exactly what you might need and just see if someone accepts Monero. So your tool, this Monerica, is really key, I think, to growing the circular economy because it is kind of hard to find. But Monerica makes it really, really easy. The second thing, I guess, would just be just spreading kind of the propaganda about Monero, helping people understand why they should use Monero over something like, say, Bitcoin or even Litecoin or ETH or something else like that. And I always point to the Canadian truckers protests as like, hey, they use Bitcoin and they kind of some of them got in trouble for it, and maybe if they had used Monero instead. So I think what's missing is just trying to get more outreach to people who use other cryptos.
Is there anything specifically with regards to Monerica that you think should be changed or improved to help the mission of this bankless free life? Any sections perhaps that might be added or
Yeah, yeah, no, I think you do an excellent job. I mean, the other thing I could think of is just maybe having the different sections sort of maybe be separate or not having to scroll down, maybe just having a nice central search box or maybe have tabs of the different classifications, like featured, having that at the top, and then never mind, you have the categories, but maybe having the categories more up top. I mean, otherwise, I think it's excellent. If you were to add more things like educational things, it might be too, there's always so much you could add. So a lot of times it's taking away that is it. So I don't think it's necessary to add, like videos, how-to videos or educational materials. I think just keeping it how it is and just making it look as pretty as possible.
thanks. Yeah, maybe we could talk more about some of that in person or something. But yeah, it's over 600 listings, and I get it becomes kind of busy at some point. But and I've tried to think about that. But yeah, it's a nice problem to have. I've had a lot of people submit, um, and so what what would you say is kind of a bigger challenge with the circular economy? Is it just that the price is volatile, or that it's not easy enough to use, or is there something else entirely that's kind of putting the brakes on a little more than would be otherwise?
Well, I think it's just kind of the usual thing of acquiring, Monero. Like any crypto, you have to learn how to set it up and run the node and which wallet versus not which wallet. So there's things like that. To me, I look at the big picture and I think about that Monero by it, on its own isn't as compelling as when you put it in a larger context of life. So for me, Monero and Bitcoin is just another tool in the larger set of tools that I personally have. And so I think when you talk about Monero and the reason to use it and build that circular economy is because it's part of larger privacy and part of larger sovereignty. So a lot of people know that they should use like Proton Mail and strong encrypted emails and chat, use a VPN and Tor and all those things. And so those people who are already doing those things, I think Monero then fits into those well. So I would say, hey, that's great you use a VPN and it's great you use privacy email and it's great you try to set up your browser to like block cookies and all those types of things and try to not use Google. I mean, those are important things, but I would say if you're doing all those things, but your money isn't private, you're it's kind of a gaping hole in your OPSEC because I mean, money is it, right? Like money kind of says a lot about you, where you spend money. It's linked to your identity. When you use fiat currencies and payment processors, they share and sell your information. They can correlate things. And so having Monero in a larger context of saying, hey, you care about privacy, you care about being sovereign. So if you're doing all these things, why would you not use Monero? And when you put it in that context, people say, okay, I see now. It's just not Monero is the silver bullet. I don't need to worry about anything else. It's part of everything that you have to do, I would say.
What, in your opinion, is the biggest benefit for a business to accept Monero? Maybe not exclusively, but as an option for payment.
I think there's several benefits to accept Monero if you're a business. Number one is you get to earn Monero. It feels like free money. It's not, but when you accept Monero and you get an order or a payment in and you see that Monero go into your wallet, it just feels like it's free money, even though you worked hard, running your business. It's just, you know, subjectively very gratifying. Another reason is you expand your customer base. For this conference and for Guns and Bitcoin, more people use Monero than Bitcoin, and actually Bitcoin and fiat combined. I'd have to check our latest stats for Finney Forum, but it's pretty close to that. And so by offering Monero, you just get more customers. And for those who pay in Monero, it's like kind of dumb, obvious things like you don't pay the 3-4% credit card fee. You don't have the burden of having your customers' information in your database, which maybe it'll be exploited one day. Um, and so it's just like, why not? Why not is what I would say.
Why do you think Monero isn't more popular?
I just think that it's seen as niche. I think Monero is seen as even like dangerous when you see it delisted. Um, And quite honestly, I just think that not as many people care about their privacy and security as they should. I think it's just an educational thing. So Monero can only be as big and adopted as people see the need for it. And most people just simply don't. It's just the reality. Even though they should, but they don't. And another reason is I think the biggest pool of potential Monero users are actually other crypto users. And I would say Bitcoin, just because people using Ethereum, it's often more for like smart contract stuff, not as a payment. So I think better outreach to Bitcoiners, I think goes a long way. And that's
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
another reason why we're doing Finney Forum is to try to get more Bitcoiners aware of the pros of Monero. And it's been so hard doing that over the years because unfortunately the laser-eyed maxis and Bitcoin are um, so hostile towards anything that's not Bitcoin. But fortunately, that's changing. There's been a whole bunch of users coming to Bitcoin because of ordinals, and those people like using Bitcoin. They're spending Bitcoin to buy and sell these inscriptions. And so those are already people who are familiar with using Bitcoin as a method of payment. So then if we say, hey, Monero is another cryptocurrency that's most commonly used as a method of payment, it's a nice sort of gateway for those people. I think arguing with maxis is a losing strategy. I think you just ignore them and go after people who are more open-minded and practical.
And on that note, do you think there is merit in being a Bitcoin maximalist? Why or why
I
not?
think that the biggest advantage to being a Bitcoin maximalist is it does actually save you from a lot of scams because as much as maxis are obnoxious and I think backwards, about the one thing that they have right is that the majority of crypto is, if not a scam, then just a waste of time, and that almost all alt currencies that aren't Bitcoin really are a bad ROI in use of time. And so that's the one thing they've gotten right. And I would say that if you are a maxi, you have avoided a lot of losing money on these other chains, whether it's through smart contract hacks, which are common, or bad wallets, browser wallets. So it has saved a lot of people. The flip side to that, though, is being a maxi has prevented people from seeing the flaws of Bitcoin, which there's many. It's prevented people from adopting Monero, and it's prevented progress on Bitcoin development. So it's not all or nothing, but I think now things are changing and people understand the pros and cons of the maxi philosophy.
And how do you feel about Monero increasingly getting delisted from centralized exchanges? Is this good, bad, or something
I
else?
think it's good and bad. I think it does slow down the adoption of Monero. It does make it harder to acquire it, and it does make it harder to exchange it for Bitcoin or even fiat. So I think short term it does hurt. I think long term it's a very good thing, because if you use Monero, the main reason to do so is privacy. I think that's totally the case. And there is, if you buy Monero at a centralized KYC exchange, there is that metadata. And even though we all know about, why Monero is private and all of its tools to do that and its design, the fact is, whenever you have metadata and associated, and you have a lot of people who have metadata attached to Monero transactions, you have enough metadata, you can start to narrow down who transactions might apply to. It's hard, but there's there's no good upside to having any sort of metadata attached to Monero. Even if you say, well, I spent it 3 hops and now that KYC is gone, to a large extent that might be true. But I just think by delisting and not having KYC AML metadata attached to anything at all, it just greatly reduces the attack surface when it comes to Monero's privacy.
And Monero intends to implement some protocol upgrades, which may happen in the future. Is there anything specifically regarding some of those kind of concerns, or anything you think strongly needs to be added as it's still being kind of fleshed out? I think you may have heard of Seraphis.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind. I mean, I'm not a Monero pro, but Luke Parker is speaking at Finney Forum, about his work. And so maybe I'm just not smart enough to know the details of anything that concerns me. I mean, the history of Monero has been pretty good when it comes to upgrades. It's not perfect, hasn't been perfect, but generally you've got some of the smartest people working on Monero, and generally you have people who are adversarial trying to break it. So, it doesn't keep me up at night if there's, oh, we got this hard fork to implement this thing. Like in most other maybe cryptocurrencies, I would really not want to touch a hard fork. But I think Monero has succeeded, and that's why the hard forks have worked, because the testing and design has been so rigorous. Won't be perfect, but it's not something that keeps me up at night.
And then regarding Bitcoin, is there any feature or change that you think should occur to the Bitcoin protocol, or do you think it's pretty ossified?
I think Bitcoin is, it could go two ways. Generally, you can say it's ossified just because of the ordinals with Taproot assets, upset a lot of people. And so you've seen them try to apply filters and try to do some other things to stop that. And they're kind of saying, well, we're never going to have another upgrade like Taproot because it had this unintended consequence of ordinals, which is just polluting the chain. So there will be people who are going to try to ossify it. But I'm more optimistic. I think the significant number of new users to Bitcoin and the type of those people actually want to see upgrades, so they're more open to it. So I know there's a few things they're working on, like what is a CAT, CAT. So I'm optimistic that Bitcoin now will probably improve more, but it usually takes a heck of a lot longer in Bitcoin, which is okay. It's a conservative approach, but there's nothing on like the horizon where I think, oh, this is an upgrade that's really gonna make things better or make things worse. To me, the my particular concern with Bitcoin is mining. It's just kind of what it's always been. is the mining issue.
So yeah, what do you think on ASICs versus ASIC resistance? Is one better or worse, or do they both have their place?
I think we've seen the huge risk that not having ASIC resistance gives you. So I think the big problem with Bitcoin is mining. I mean, after it's not being very private, but mining. And as we've seen this just less than a week ago, where there was, what was it, it was the Energy Commission, whatever the agency is, was going to demand that these large scale miners share their energy usage. And why would they do that? Well, it's a way to monitor and then, of course, long term censor. And it was only because I don't know if it was the state of Texas or someone in Texas sued and got that paused. So you can see that what happens when you don't have ASIC resistance, when everything is ASICs, it can only really be done on sort of the industrial scale. And to get that much capital, so capital intensive, a lot of it is publicly held companies. It's significantly large private companies, all of which have to comply with regulations. And so it just makes Bitcoin a lot easier to censor and control if you could do it at the mining level. So whereas Monero, obviously, I mean, it's going to be really hard for the government to say, hey, everyone who's mining Monero, we need you to send us your energy usage. Like that's hilarious. And so to me, I think people underestimate how useful and critical that ASIC resistance has been to, for Monero, unlike almost all other chains. It's really impressive.
And taking it further, what do you think of proof of stake?
Well, that's interesting now. Before, I was always pretty skeptical and anti proof of stake. I think for the same reasons a lot of people don't like it. But what's interesting about proof of stake is you don't quite have that issue that proof of work has, especially for Bitcoin, where you need such industrial scale mining. And so I could see a case where proof of stake actually offers some advantages in terms of like energy usage and maybe not having that same attack vector as like Bitcoin proof of work has. I know there's now proof of stake um, projects that you might call it that are trying to build on Bitcoin layer one. So we'll see how that goes. But I think proof of stake is just another tool, another technology. Honestly, I don't keep up with it too much, but now I'm trying to see, especially now we're seeing, especially in the US, hostility towards proof of work mining for Bitcoin.
Right, yeah, it definitely makes the energy argument kind of go away, and then I don't know what the next argument would be, but there's always something, right? They got no shortage of things they want to attack, anything that they can't control with. But I guess one of my last questions, I mean, and if anyone wants to ask a question, just request speakership. Feel free to do that. Um, I don't see that right now, but if I do see that, then
Yeah, usually what happens is no one requests to speak, and then the last minute, right before, as you're wrapping up, you get three people who want to speak. So
well, yeah, give people some time to think for a minute if there's something I haven't covered.
yeah. Well, I wanted to
And
ask
then
you, when did you start Monerica, and what prompted you to do that? Because it's kind of a lot of work. I mean, this is pretty extensive that you have.
yeah, I think I was watching Monerotopia, and I've had a history of kind of making little online communities here and there, and I was going to go to the conference alone, and I was like, what can I contribute? I decided to DJ for them, and I also was like, well, that's great, but like, what am I really doing? What problem do I really see? What would people keep asking me about? So that was in 2022, less than 2 years ago. So I made it about 2 years ago, and it was basically just like, I'm tired of people being like, well, what can you do with this? What can you do with this? Like, whatever. It's like, well, there's all these sites out there, but then you go to those generic crypto sites and they're just some kind of like SEO hustle of like some barber in Wisconsin that's supposed to take crypto that has no idea what you're talking about. That's just some kind of link building hustle. And I was like, yeah, that's not real. Like, are these sites like vouching for it or not? And just really getting curious about what's possible with what's out there and just trying to aggregate it. And I just answer the simple question of what can you do with Monero? And obviously, it has a bad reputation with, um, illicit activities, and I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think it's, what else, right? So basically, just answering the question of what you can do, and it started out pretty much just as an HTML page, and then after I went to the Monerotopia and people started to see it and talk about it, then it was like, okay, open source it. And then that's on GitHub. And then obviously there's still too much friction there with accounts and pull requests and whatever. So then I said more recently, let me just take it to the next level. And you don't need an account. You don't need anything. I'll go and manually look at it. And it's in a database instead of like a GitHub repository. And then, yeah, periodically I will just take the page and put it in a archived part of the repo just in case some kind of catastrophe happens. But yeah, and then I think I started to get some more attention, and I think the Mental Outlaw, this channel on YouTube with like over 500,000 subs, decided out of the blue to make a 45-minute video on all the random stuff, and I thought that was funny, and that got some traction. And then then I decided, what am I doing this? I had some donations, but then I was like, I'm getting too much traffic to just not do that. So then the sponsorship. So that's what's kept it going for the last since kind of the end of last year.
Yeah, I have to say that I'm kind of surprised that this hadn't been done before at a large scale. I mean, kind of, I would think, it's easy for me to criticize other people not doing things if I'm not doing it myself, but I'm a little surprised that this didn't happen sooner. So I think it's great you're doing this, and I hope that more will like copy and paste this, or will expand on this so it gets as much exposure as possible, especially since how much work it is. And you kind of mentioned something about YouTube, and I'm hoping that more people in like the larger privacy space, maybe cybersecurity space, integrates Monero into kind of their toolkit and talk about it more. Like, I'm still kind of surprised how there's this gulf between, or chasm between, Monero and the people who otherwise care about their security but don't have Monero. Like, for example, yeah, I just don't see it in certain places that I thought that it would. So just kind of my thought, like something like what you do, I think helps bridge the gap for a lot of people, and services as well. I think by going to Monerica and scrolling down and seeing who accepts Bitcoin or Monero, I think it also just creates more bridges. I think it's good advertising for those companies, and I think it just builds confidence in its use case. So I'm really glad you're doing it. Really glad Monerica is a partner with Finney Forum.
Yeah, I think there was another on one of the points you made. There was another directory, but it's the devil's in the details. It's like anyone can go and make a page, that has some merchants, but like, are you going to maintain it for years? Like, that's the difference. And so there were a few that had done something similar, but that's just stale. Like, because I had to write something to crawl the site, see if the URLs are around. Like, I rely on people also to give me feedback if something's offline. So, and you need a whole community to be able to do that. And so I thank and appreciate everybody who's submitted links and has identified ones that are problems. And and I'm not customer service for these companies, and I feel like sometimes when people have a problem, they'll try to email me or something, but I obviously want to help people get resolutions, but that's also I could try to email some of the companies. Most people are good, but the larger you get, there's always going to be something that is flaky and something. So yeah, I really only want the advertise. I want the advertisers ideally to be like you can trust them, and that's pretty much been the case. So yeah, because if someone's open, if someone's opening up a shop and just like any kind of real world market, like they're there, and when a link gets kind of stale or something, or I go back and I don't see that it says Monero, and it's surprising sometimes they'll be like, oh, I removed their listing, I didn't tell anybody, and then they'll be like emailing me like the next day like, oh, why'd you remove it? I'm like, well, it doesn't say Monero anymore. It's like, okay, well, add it back. I'm like, oh, and they add it back like real quick. I'm like, okay, wow. So they're out
Yeah,
there.
it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So I hope, you know, more people support it. And, obviously I'll give it a shout out at Finney Forum, so people are aware of it.
And yeah, I will be giving out stickers there since I am going. So if you come up to me and you want a high quality vinyl Monerica sticker, I will give that to you for free.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll have you post it up at the check, and that's often where people pick up those things, put some stickers there. So yeah, really appreciate being a partner.
And I guess one of my last questions, doesn't look like anyone is trying to speak here. And again, if anyone is listening and they want to ask a question, then feel free. But I guess, how much of your life do you personally live off of crypto? If you don't mind me asking, and you don't have to be too specific, just trying to get a kind of feel for it.
I have to think. So I try to anything that's like a digital good. I try to use Monero or Bitcoin, not all the time, but I try to do that. I don't focus too much on like meat space type of payments. Um, I mean, there's not that many, meat space companies that accept it, but I don't have a breakdown. But the most I would say is that I try to, especially for things where I really want to protect my privacy. I just hate when I go and buy something online and you have to fill in like my phone number and my name and my address like almost every time. It like annoys me almost every time, especially uh, as someone who owns a couple of businesses that accept Bitcoin and Monero. It's hard for me to see when orders come in and I see people's name and address. Like I don't want it, but that's just the reality. So I don't have exact percentage breakdown, but I will say that part of there's different ways to make money, and a good way is to offer a service where you earn Monero. So that's people usually think of using Monero, Bitcoin, just paying for things, but the flip side of that is earning, and so that's where I tend to focus. Some of my life and time is on that end of things.
Yeah, and I've kind of shifted my focus or just perspective on crypto. I think it's 15 years of Bitcoin, and Monero nearly 10, and obviously price speculation. But what's next? Is it just looking to this sky and fiat going whatever? I feel like the best opportunities are the opportunities entrepreneurially, and some of the things I've seen having kind of built this economy, and I'm not sure how much I've inspired or influenced people, but I've just seen things that are really interesting. Like there's a few companies out there where, and one was just launched the other day, where you can become an affiliate of some of these companies. Not only you don't need to give any email, any name. You can just get a link. They'll generate a code for you and a password, and you can get a link, and then that effectively enables you to start earning Monero by just sharing links. So what about all the people that don't have bank accounts? What about the people that are at this, especially in this day and age, that are under 18, that have a mastery of the internet, that they can't even open a bank account, but they can go post links and to VPN companies or whatever it's going to be. Or so I feel like there's a lot. But yeah, earning is part of it, and how you hedge that. I mean, spend it, spend it immediately if it's a problem. I mean, it's hard to speculate, but yeah, there are ways, and the gift cards and the prepaid cards, like some people may say, oh, that's not this or that, but you know, it's still you're still making a transaction. You're still participating in a way that you're more so than you would if you're not using it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's a lot.
I'd
Yeah.
love to see someone write a blog post or something about affiliate links and who's out there doing what, because that is a good thing. We thought about doing affiliate marketing for the conference, but it's just extra work, and I have like limited time. It's not what I do full time for my job. Um, but like, sort of, this is a totally different topic, but I think it would be sort of hilarious but still useful if Monero did have like ordinals. I know people would hate it, but I will say that on Bitcoin, it actually has driven a lot of commerce. I mean, we've seen on chain how many transactions are just related to ordinals and inscriptions, and you have to pay everything in Bitcoin. So maybe Monero doesn't need that. Probably it doesn't. But I'm just saying, at least on Bitcoin, it has driven a lot of usage that just wasn't there. So totally different topic, kind of funny, controversial, but I'll just throw that out there. That I guess my point is that digital products are a lot more compelling than physical products. Is all.
Yeah, I think that there's this whole mindset that people have that it's like, oh, I can't spend Bitcoin or Monero at Walmart, so therefore it has no purpose. It's just like it just shows how conditioned people are to what commerce is or that they think it is, when there's so many things you can get online or digital things. Yeah, VPNs, all these proxies to buy things in different merchants. There's such a robust online economy that I feel that's where the most obvious use cases are, because it's like I guess because crypto, I think of it more of like as a settlement layer than a transaction layer, and the whole transaction layer thing is just like, I don't know, it's really hard to have that kind. You're never gonna really, I don't know if you're ever gonna have the speed of a centralized server with a decentralized consensus network. So it's a settlement network in a lot of ways, and what that's great for is online stuff. And there's so much fraud in the credit card industry, and there's stuff that people buy like tickets or plane tickets or concert tickets that if that by the time that it's reported, like it's already exhausted. So there's the obvious benefit is the elimination of fraud and chargebacks and all of that kind of stuff. So I don't see why a business wouldn't want to accept it, crypto in general.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point, which I kind of forgot, which is a reason to use Monero. If you're going to use a crypto, is it's cheaper than Bitcoin, and it's faster, just faster transaction, faster confirmation times, and just lower fees, which is especially now in the world era of ordinals. I think the fees are going to be high most of the time, like not 10 cents, but like dollars. And that's just, too high. And people were hoping the Lightning Network would solve a lot of things. People hoped that it would give you fast and cheap transactions, but Lightning Network really hasn't worked out as people thought it would, and then the fees are high anyways, and there's problems. So, forget privacy for a second. It's faster and cheaper to use Monero than Bitcoin. So, and maybe there's some way that I would love to see a way that you could use Monero to pay for Bitcoin transactions somehow. That would be such a cool thing to do, but maybe it's just not possible.
Yeah, there's still definitely more innovation to come. I just think there's so much that's still just available with what we have that I'd like. That's what I like about circular economy stuff is just, yeah, solving problems that are, you know, solving problems with the technology that's here. That it's so powerful in its abilities, and yeah, so yeah, there's new stuff I see every day, and the great thing is, yeah, I'm getting multiple links a week or things of new businesses, and it's becoming more competitive. It's becoming a real economy, and that's what, it is. It's competition and innovation, and the bigger the market is, the more there's an interest. And yeah, I hope Bitcoin Monero communities can work together more effectively, because I think that benefits everyone. And so, is there any final thought or details you'd like to share? It doesn't look like anyone has requested speakership. So,
No, I mean, if no one requests to speak, I would say my final thoughts are that please come to Finney Forum, of course. It's March 15th and 16th. It's only $99 for early bird, so um, pretty affordable. It's about as cheap as you can get doing a conference. It's in Dallas, so lots of flights, lots of accommodations. So please come out to Finney Forum. I know several of you are going to be there, Divert or Monero UK, and I know a few other people listening are going to be there. And I just want to say thanks for being a partner, and I hope everyone tries out Monerica, and hopefully the conference will give more exposure, and maybe some Bitcoin companies will start accepting Monero just out of self-interest. So appreciate you putting on the space and being part of Finney Forum.
yes, thank you so much for joining, and thanks to all for listening to today's Voices of the Monero Economy.
Excellent.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.